Why do so many Black women say they don't trust Black women leaders? And what are the implications for this in terms of healing and working together and working with each other? And why is this such a strain? Why is this such an issue for Black women? So that's what we're talking about today. Hi, my name is Trina Parham, and I am a spiritual mentor and guide for Black women on alternative spiritual paths who are looking for their path forward, a healing. A way of healing and doing all those sorts of things. So if that sounds like you, you're in the right place. I'm also the creator of the Wild Waters Private Retreat. So that is a retreat where I guide women on their sacred journeys and paths to finding their way forward on their spiritual path. So that's what I do, and I'm glad you're here. So I want to talk about what happens between Black women, particularly at work, and why so many Black women say they don't like having Black women as bosses. And what are the spiritual implications for this? And what are the things that we need to work on? What if you find yourself being this kind of person, being this kind of leader, like what's actually going on here? And this is what I want to talk about today. So, I talk about spirituality on this channel. In my other life, and I have another YouTube channel, I am a leadership coach, mentor, and guide. I do organizational development and strategy. I'm a social worker by training. So I've done a lot of work. I do a lot of work in the workplace around workplace dynamics and relationships and things like that. And I've been a director. I've worked in city government. I've worked in nonprofits. I've worked in NGOs, for the past 25 years. And so that's just my experience. So, in addition to this very deep spiritual work that I do and that I talk about here, so that's the context that I have for this conversation we're getting ready to have. So, what kicked this off for me was I was watching a video earlier this week where it was of a YouTuber who was commenting on a video from a Black woman who's a YouTuber who was commenting on a TikTok by a Black woman who was saying, and she looked young. They both looked pretty young, probably, I'm going to guess early 30s, early to mid 30s. But anyway, they were talking about how this one woman was saying how she did not like working for Black women as bosses. And if she was put in a position where she was given a Black boss, that she would want to quit. And she said that white men have been her biggest champions and her best bosses. And so this YouTuber is essentially sort of breaking down piece by piece everything that was said in this TikTok, and the comments. And so I went through the comments, and there were so many comments about people who were saying, yes, this is actually their experience, that working for Black women as bosses was a horrible experience or a really bad negative experience. And so the first thought that came to mind was these Black women who say this, if they do their job well enough, they're eventually going to get promoted. And so then what kind of boss would they be? And do they want people to feel that way about them? That was the very first thought that came to mind. But it made me think about experiences that I've had in my past and previous work experience, and also the spiritual implications and the healing needs for Black women given this scenario, because I've heard it a lot. I've certainly experienced Black women being bad bosses, but I've also experienced white men and other people being horrible, horrifying bosses. So I get it. And I think off the top, what I'll say is I think it's more of a shock more than anything when you meet a Black woman or a Black person in general, but specifically we'll keep it to Black women, who is your boss, is in a position of authority, and they don't support you in the way that you're used to or that you need or that you're expecting. And I think that's one part of it. And then some Black women are downright, I guess, can try to derail your career or treat you really mean or horribly or whatever. And I hear a lot of younger women say this about older Black women. And so that's really what I want to talk about as well. But I want to start with a couple of stories. So years ago in my city government days, actually, let me rewind the clock even before that. So years ago, I was in my early 20s, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I went to the Peace Corps. And but before I went, I was working for about 9, 10 months at this women's organization, and I was sort of prepping for Peace Corps. And by this point, I already had my assignment. I knew what country I was going to. I went to Costa Rica, by the way. But anyway, so I was getting everything ready, and they hired a new assistant director, or maybe she was like the assistant executive director or something like that. And she was a black woman who had a PhD, and she seemed nice. Like, again, I hadn't worked with her that long, and I already had my exit date, and I think I maybe had maybe 2 weeks left. Like, it wasn't a very long time, but that I actually worked with her. Maybe I worked with her for a month or so, maybe two. But anyway, so I ended up having a meeting with her before I was supposed to leave. And she asked me like what my plans were. And I was telling her, oh, I've been thinking about, working on this for a while. I'm going to the Peace Corps. I finally got my assignment. And she asked me, why did I want to go? And I said, well, I love to travel. I want to live abroad. I want to, learn Spanish. I want to be able to work and do something, in another country. But specifically around the Spanish thing, that was the thing that really stood out to me that I said at the time. And she was like, well, you don't need the Peace Corps for that. And it was one of these moments that I was just like, but this is what I'm doing. And I was kind of like a bull in a china shop back then. So it was very rare for someone to be able to derail me from my plans. But I remember sitting in that meeting with her thinking, why would you say that to me? And it wasn't just what she said. Like, it wasn't like she probed or asked more questions. It was more like, well, you don't need to do this to do that. And I was just like, first of all, I didn't ask you to comment on my plans, number one. And but it was very off-putting, and I couldn't understand like why she said that to me and why she said it in the way that she did. It came across as nasty. It came across like I didn't know what I was doing, or like it was just a very weird interaction, again, for someone that I didn't really know well at all. And it definitely turned me off from her. But again, I was leaving, and that was that. But I mean, that experience happened probably 25 years ago, longer than 25 years ago, and probably closer to 30. And that has still stuck with me. And so, fast forward, when I was working in city government, I had a Black woman as a boss, an Afro Brazilian woman as a boss. And when I tell you she was a terror, she was an absolute terror. And she was one of the smartest people I ever knew. Like, she was very smart. She was very charismatic when she wanted to be. And uh but she had this temper where, I mean, she would scream at her staff. She's passed away, by the way. But anyway, but she used to scream at her staff, and my the wall to my office was next to the wall of her assistant's office, and so I could hear her go on these tirades. And I remember one time, like, she went off on me, and I was like, "Absolutely not." And I told her, I said, "I don't know who you think you're talking to, but I'm not about to sit here and let you yell at me or talk to me this way. So you need to figure it out." And I walked out. And and that was like right before I was going on vacation. And so I was like kind of on pins and needles while I was on vacation, not understanding like what was going to happen. But I'm like, I was not all about to let this woman disrespect me under no circumstances. I'm like, I do my job, I do it well. Like, this is uncalled for. It's not necessary to work this way. And when I came back to the office, her and I, we had a meeting, and she said to me, I'll never forget, she said, she apologized, and she said, my behavior was grotesque. That's what she said. And so I'm thinking we came to an understanding. But what ended up happening was she backed off of me, but she still treated everyone the same. And she went so far as to prevent me from getting a raise. She prevented me from getting, there was a group of us that she prevented us from getting certain promotions. I eventually did get promoted, but not to the higher position that I actually initially applied for. That's a whole other thing. But anyway, and so yeah, I had, really horrible experiences in those two instances. But then I've also had experiences with Black women who have been my biggest champions, in the workplace. And I want to also mention a story that I had with a white male boss, and I've got a few, but I'll just share this one. So I was there again in city government. I was working for a guy who he was sort of like the head boss, like my boss's boss. And he seemed okay, like a lot he had a pretty solid reputation, a lot of people liked him. I didn't know this guy that well, but, anyway, we had this sort of, citywide meeting, and I ended up now my boss, he and I did not get along that well, and even though I was doing my job well, everything like that, he and I, we just bumped heads, like, about a lot of stuff. And he was not happy about me being on the team, but I'm like, I'm here, I'm doing my job, like, we'll just have to work through it. And this white man, after this meeting, he came up to me and essentially was trying to get me to quit my job. And this man physically backed me into a corner. Like it was sort of a side room off of the main room where the meeting was. And this guy physically was backing me into a corner and trying to tell me, well, aren't you ready to leave this job? Aren't you ready to quit? Like, I mean, but very intimidating. And I thought to myself, I was really scared, but I did not back down. And so what I ended up doing was talking to a colleague, a Black woman who had been in city government a very long time. And she told me the exact steps to take and exactly what I needed to do. And so I basically put this white man on blast in an email chain to that I CC'd like 5 or 6 people. And he did not respond in email. He would not respond to the allegations. He would not respond to anything that he did. But he called me. And I said, absolutely not. Under no circumstances will I talk to you one on one with no witnesses. No. And again, he backed off. My boss backed off. But it was a really scary situation. And at this point, I was young. I was in my mid to late 20s at this point. And so it was a very scary situation to be in with this man. And so when I hear people say that, white men are the better bosses and all of that, I think about this man and I think about other white men that I've been and had to encounter at work where it was horrible. And again, like I said, I've had black women in my out who I worked with and for who were horrible, but for the most part, the black women that I worked with were amazing. And when I became a boss, when I became a manager and a director and I had a team, I always made a point to treat people the way that I wanted to be treated, giving autonomy. I taught a university class, all of these things that I've done. And I'm like, and so it made me think about how did I treat people? How did I expect people to engage and interact with me? And my thing is, as long as we were respectful and the work was getting done, I was going to give folks, freedom and space to do what they needed to do. And so when I hear this conversation online about Black women saying they don't like working for other Black women, it makes me it gives me pause and it makes me take a step back as to why. And one of the things that I think comes up a lot is I think a lot of Black women who didn't have good relationships either with their mothers or didn't have close relationships with other Black women often feel this way. And it can be very discouraging. It can be very discouraging to be in an environment where you're expecting someone who looks like you to be on your side, and when they're not on your side, it can be really painful. But I want to go a level deeper because I think a lot of the women who watch this channel and listen to me are older, and by older I mean 40 plus. And so we've had experience in the workplace. And so I was thinking about this, like, what is it about older Black women who treat other women this way? Like, what is going on? When I think back to those two women that I worked with, like, what is it about them what was going on with them that made them respond to me in the way that they did? And I mean, we can go through the typical things like, I don't think it's jealousy. It could be, is it resentment? Is it, people living dreams that you wish you had lived, making choices that, you didn't have or whatever. Or it could just be a form of control and wanting to control and wanting people to do what you think they ought to do, even though it's not your business or your concern. And I think Black women are in this really interesting position where you're in the community and you are tasked with being the backbone, being doing the emotional labor, picking up the slack, doing all of those things. And so that can get muddied really quickly and turn into codependency. And so when I see Black women in this scenario and in this situation, it really makes me think about why, like what's going on with us that we feel like we have to control everyone and everybody. And I think what I've come to is for many Black women, it was excessively difficult to make their way, particularly in work. And I think in other ways as well. And so what I see when I look at some of these women is how painful it was, how much of a struggle it was, and not having support, not having a soft place to land, not having anyone who looked out for them. And then you come across some younger Black women, and I don't know, there's this thing in our culture where we want people to pay. It's like if we feel like people have an easier time at something than we did, then we think it's unfair, or we think they somehow got away with something that they shouldn't have gotten away with. And I think we have to let that mentality go because it's so damaging to think that, someone has to suffer in the same ways that you did. And so it's like, I think you have to go a level deeper and ask yourself why. If that's something that you felt, that you want someone to have to struggle in the way that you did, like, what is that about? Why is that? And we often don't think of being the one who's paving a way for someone while we're getting the things that we need and want. And we're creating a groove, we're creating a path that someone else can follow. And hopefully it'll be easier for them and then it'll be easier for the next person. That's called legacy, right? And while I don't think that's something that you have to focus on, especially at work when things are really bad, and I've seen Black women treated horribly in the workplace for so many reasons. And the thing about bosses and working with people who aren't Black women, they have so many more insidious ways of holding you back and treating you badly. But because it's not as in your face as a Black woman, it's like we don't treat it the same. But a white person, a white man specifically, can just not hire you, can just like not bring you in for an interview. Not to say that Black women can't do that too, but they have ways that they don't even have to engage with you. So you don't even know if they would be a good boss or not. I think with Black women and when you're engaging with other Black women, it's because we're so close. And that's what makes it so difficult. But I think I want to talk about really the spiritual implications of this experience because I think it cuts really deep for us. And so I think for the young Black woman who was starting off in her career and who was looking for support and looking for allies, it can be tricky. And I think you have to give people the benefit of the doubt and understand, but also don't let people treat you like trash either. And I think for the more seasoned woman, the Black woman who is in these workplaces, that I feel like we have to take a step back and really think about, um, sort of reflect on how you've been treated and the things that you needed and that you wanted that you didn't receive. Because I feel like that's a big part of it. Like, and it can be very isolating. And there's this feeling in work in a lot of workplaces where it's like there can only be one. And here's the thing, and the gag is we didn't create that. That is a white supremacist patriarchal creation of this idea of there being a pie, and if you're a Black woman, you only get this one slice that you have to divvy up amongst all the Black women in the organization or in the company, while everyone else gets the rest of the pie. And so if there's five slices of pie, four slices go to, white and non-Black people, and Black women have this one slice that they all have to share. And when that happens, I think it creates a crabs in a barrel mentality, and people get desperate. People want to hold on to their spot because it's that feeling of there can only be one of us, and I'm not willing to sacrifice myself for you. I think that's a lot of what it is. And so when we have this conversation about what's going on with Black women at work, we have to look at it in totality. You have to look at the system that is creating this in the first place. And I think when Black women talk about not wanting to work with other Black women and how hard it is, I think that's a context. But again, I've experienced working for Black women who were terrible to me. And so, while I understand it's not pleasant. It's a very difficult experience to work with a Black woman who acts like that. And I know I hear people say this a lot about us, but I have a lot more compassion for it when I say it. And what I'm going to say is how Black women we have a chip on our shoulder. That's what people say about us a lot. And again, I think about the spiritual implications as to why. And when you are a person that has been browbeaten, discriminated against, marginalized, held back, held down, and despite all of that, you manage to move forward. You manage to find your place. You manage to create a career for yourself and do all sorts of things. And, it can really take its toll on you. And we don't talk enough about the toll that all of this takes on Black women. We talk about how strong we are, how strong we have to be. We have to just keep showing up. We just have to keep going. But we don't talk enough about the painful implications of that. And so there's this part of us that we have to be able to access of our vulnerability, our softness. But it's like, where do you get to be that? And so I think this is what I see in a lot of Black women where they didn't have a lot of softness, they didn't experience a lot of softness, or and I've experienced this myself where you can't show any type of weakness at work. And so it's like, and I think a lot of Black women deal with that too. Where it's like, I can't show any weakness, any vulnerability. I can't cry. I can't show anger. I can't show sadness. I can't show really any emotion. Black women are often put in such a small, tight box. And anything that you do that steps outside of that box can get you fired, can put a target on your back. And so I get it. I get the struggle. I really do, and it's really difficult to deal with. I'm not going to lie to you. Um, and so I'm just looking at my notes here. Um, so how can we release this chip on our shoulder if that's something that you feel like you have? And I want to say again, if you are a Black woman who is a boss and you treated people wrong, or that you've been extra mean, or and again, I've been described as mean at some point, not necessarily at work, but like in other areas of my life. I like to say I'm kind, but I'm not necessarily nice. Or I wouldn't say that. I'm like, I don't know that I'm the most approachable person initially, even though I feel like I'm a very kind, loving person. But I'm someone that's like, okay, I want to get to know you. Like, I want to feel you out a little bit. And I'm not being nasty or anything like that. But sometimes it's like, I just need to see what you're about first, And so I'm someone that you might take a little bit longer to get to know. And although I'm very conversational when I meet people, I'm very curious about people. I like to talk to people. I like to get to know people. And so sometimes I think it's just my face, like, having that resting bitch face, although it has softened over the years. And so I try to be mindful of my facial expressions and things like that. Um, and so I think that's part of it. But so how do you deal with this? How do you, if you're someone that has treated people like this, or you have this kind of reputation as a Black woman, as a leader, what do you do about it? And I think this is why I love tapping into the Divine Mother, because I think that's a really soft place to land. And so whether you create ceremony or ritual for yourself in some kind of way to begin to have a space where you can be vulnerable and you can be honest. And in the Wild Waters retreat that I do, the virtual retreat that I do, it's a one-on-one experience. And this is part of the kind of work that I would do with someone, is to help figure out, what this could look like. But I think you have to be honest with yourself about why. Why do you treat people that way? What do you get out of it? Like, what is it that you're needing, or what is it that you didn't get, or what is it that you're afraid of that might happen? And to really take a very close look at that for yourself. I feel like that self-inquiry is where it has to start. And being very, very honest and not blaming other people. I think you have to you have to acknowledge other people's role in your problem. You have to acknowledge the role of the system in your problem, but also where do you have to take responsibility and what are some of the things that you can change? But again, I think it's more about what is the thing that you need. Because when people act that way, they definitely have a need. They have something that is a need that has gone unmet, probably for a really long time. And so, what is it? I think you have to figure that out for yourself. And I would also say you have to do an audit. Think about like what's your reputation like? If you're a boss and you have a team and now, side note on this. Sometimes as a Black woman, regardless of how you act, people will say you're mean and hard and difficult to work with, even if you're the nicest person. So you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. There's a lot of nuance here in this conversation because I know the way that Black women, particularly Black women leaders, get gaslit in the workplace. So you have to consider that also. Um, but I think you have to go in and really excavate that and take a look at the situation. And sometimes it's like, man, this career is really not for me, or this path that I'm on is really not for me. And it's like, and if this isn't it, what is? And I will say that when you have worked really hard in a career that hasn't been kind to you or hasn't been good to you, or at every step you had to get in the mud, like that is exhausting. It's exhausting, and I would encourage you to begin thinking about another path or another way or another job or something. And there's I think Black women have a very complicated relationship with the workplace because there's so many issues around how we're treated unfairly and all of the stressors and going from pet to threat and all of these things that can make it really difficult. Um, but I think it also goes back to the needs that you have personally and in your personal relationships. So whether that's a need around the relationship you have with your mom or other Black women in your life, or like I said, I think working with God as mother is really healing for this. Inner child work is really healing for this. Like those most vulnerable places inside of you that haven't been fed, that have a deep, deep need. And I think figuring out what that is and how you can begin to meet that for yourself will begin to alleviate a lot of this tension and how you might treat people maybe not the best at work. Um, and yeah, I think it's complicated. I think it's layered. I know for me, I will give Black women the benefit of the doubt in pretty much most situations. Again, like I said, I've had Black women who have been bosses who have been horrible. I've had some that have been great. I've been a boss and I've really, tried to, I treat people fairly and treat people with kindness and the way that I want to be treated, but also expecting people to do their job. And I think there's an element here of expecting Black women to be more caretakers in the workplace, and by that I just mean that there's there's this idea that Black women are, especially older Black women, are supposed to always be the nurturer and always be the soft place and always be this, you know, um, sort of like your mother, your grandmother. And it's like, no, I don't know you. And no, I'm not just giving that to anyone. But people feel entitled to Black women's care and concern. And as a result of that, when you don't give it, then people are affronted that you did not give them that. And so it creates this really weird dynamic where it's like, well, she didn't baby me, she didn't coddle me, and so now I don't like her and, I'm saying all these negative things about her. I've seen this happen a lot too. And so I think as Black women, like these are all the things that we deal with. So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because we want to move up in our careers and we want to, be at the top, or we want to, do whatever. And these are the dynamics at play. And like I said, sometimes even when you're a really great boss, because Black women collectively have this reputation, it can still be really difficult Even though when non-Black women bosses act horribly, are tyrants, yell, scream, do underhanded, dirty things to people, it's still not seen in the it's not seen in the same light, and they're giving another opportunity. Versus with Black women, if you have one Black woman boss, even if you have two, it's like then every Black woman is painted with the same broad brush. We're all put in the same category. And I think people often don't examine their own behavior and how they interact with Black women. It's like, well, what were your expectations of this person? And I feel like that's something that doesn't get discussed enough. It's like, what were you bringing to this Black woman's table? What were you bringing to her office? What were you expecting her to do? And again, I think Black women, I think we're not given the same leeway as other people, particularly at work, even from each other. And like I said, I think it's a complicated relationship, wanting to keep each other in line, feeling like there's not room for everyone. And so that can be really difficult. But I, that's pretty much what I wanted to say on this topic. I think if you are a Black woman that has not treated people right at work or in general in terms of your relationships with other Black women, spend some time on this. Like I said, going to the mother, you know, praying, lighting a candle, doing all these things that just that create a safe space and container for you to do some serious self reflection and think about one aspect that you can change or tweak is something that I think is really valuable. But also being fair to yourself, I think is really important because again, I think people put and project a lot onto Black women. And so it's important to separate yourself from that projection. Or if just because you're a tough boss or because you have certain standards and you're exacting doesn't mean that you're a bad boss. But again, I think it's because some people don't expect that of Black women, or when Black women are tough, or they're not soft, then people are affronted by that and they feel like you should be a certain way. And as a young Black woman who's in the workplace, I think you have to examine these things for yourself and also ask yourself, do you think about other bosses in the same way that you think about Black women? Like if you had a white man who was a bad boss, do you give the next white man a pass, or do you just like move on and say, well, do you treat them as individuals and then treat Black women as a collective? Like something to really consider and think about. And then when you're going to become a boss, if you're going to move up or whatever it is in your career, think about how you want to treat people and how you want to be treated and how you want to be seen as an individual and all of that. But this is also very much a spiritual conversation. This is a healing conversation because ultimately these behaviors are about what needs to be healed inside of me, what needs to be healed inside of us. And so that's really where I'm going with all of this. All of these things that I've mentioned, it's like, how do you heal this? And so again, I think that deep self-inquiry is what's really important, and beginning to give yourself the nourishment, the spirit, soul nourishment that you need. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. But again, figuring out what's needed, what's missing, what you really need, like at the depths of your core and soul, and figuring out a way to do that. I think connecting, like I said, with Great Spirit, with the Divine Mother as as divine, as spirit that holds you, is really powerful to begin to heal these dynamics around womanhood and these relationships with other women, and making sure that you get what you need, particularly in a position of power. That's also why I love working with Great Spirit as mother, as feminine, because it begins to help you heal. We have a complex relationship with power and sovereignty. And I think that's a lot of what comes up. We often as a society are uncomfortable with Black women that have power. And that's a whole other conversation. I'm not going to get into all that today. But because of that, when these dynamics play out in work, it can be really challenging to understand. And like I said, if a Black woman is not soft or looked at as your grandmother, your auntie, then, people can have a hard time interacting with her. And if she has boundaries, God forbid a Black woman have boundaries at work and she's a leader, she gets put in a very specific box. And that can be challenging to deal with as well. So, the moral of the story here is self inquiry. Take a look at your behavior, take a look at how you're treating people, take a look at your reputation, and be very honest with yourself. How much of that is actually warranted and deserved? How much of it isn't? And what are those deep core needs that you have at a soul level that have perhaps gone unmet that you need to really take a closer look at? Because what's happening at work and in the workplace is really just a symptom of something deeper that's going on. And so, how can you begin to get those needs met? And so, this is something that you're interested in. If this sounds good to you, and you're like, "Hey, this is me, and I want to take a closer look at this," I encourage you to sign up for a free call with me, a free 30-minute call, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the Wild Waters Retreat if you're interested in that. But that conversation is just let me help support you on your spiritual path and figure out what's next and how you can sort of bloom and grow on this path. And so if that's something you're interested in, definitely click the link below and we can chat and I'll tell you more. And yeah, that's it. I hope this was helpful. Please leave a comment and let me know your experience of working with other Black women in the workplace. If you are a leader, especially if you're an older Black woman and you have mentored or been a boss or manager to other Black women, what has that dynamic and experience been like for you? I'd love to know your experience. So please leave a comment. Be sure to share this video. And I would love it if you would subscribe to this channel. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching.